Hello, budding canners. Welcome back to Grab Your Jars, and I'm Lisa Bishop. Today we're going to be canning beans, and the supplies that you need to can beans are pretty basic. You will need your beans, you'll need screw bands, you'll need lids, a few other things that I use for my canning beans. I use a funnel, I keep a butter knife handy, I have my jar lifter, and I have a pie plate for my lids when I pour the boiling water over the lids. You can use any kind of shallow dish. I just use a pie plate. You'll need your jars, and you will not need to sterilize your jars because they will sterilize during the canning process. But I do run mine real quickly, just give them a quick wash. You will have to use a pressure canner to do your beans, and then I usually have a big pot of boiling water. I don't use salt, I don't put anything in the jars other than water and beans. So let's get going. To prep your beans, I just give them a quick rinse, and then I'm just gonna snip off the ends. You can use a knife, you can just snap it off, whatever your preference is. I just find it a little bit easier to use a knife. My beans aren't very long this year, so I don't know if my husband planted a different variety, or yeah, I guess that was the case. He says, yep, in the background. So I'm just gonna kind of cut them in half so that they're just about bite-sized pieces. And again, you can cut them or you can snap them, whatever's the case. So I want to do about 14 pints worth. It's just my husband and I at the house, so I prefer to can these in pints. If I'm having company, then we'll go ahead and bring out the quarts. As I'm getting ready to put the beans in my jars, I'm going to go ahead and turn the water on my boiling water so I can get that going. So your next step after you've cut your beans is to go ahead and put your beans in the jars. Again, I guess I prefer to use a wide mouth. I like to use my strainer. And then I'm going to guess that it's about a half a pound of beans goes into a pint jar. And if they're not going in, I'll just break them. And then I kind of just do this to settle them in a little bit. And then I'll just start putting them in by hand. You want to fill the jar to 1/2 inch to the top of the jar. Continue to fill these until I have 7 pints. In my case, I'm going to do 14 pints because that's how many I can fit into my pressure canner. At this point, if you want to, you can put in salt. And if you want, you would add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt to a pint. And I don't use salt because it makes no difference in the processing of the beans. And my family tends to salt when they're eating their meals, so I don't add any salt to my beans. I've also just poured some boiling water over my lids because I want them to get nice and hot. You also want to put about 2 inches of water into your large canner. I have a 22 quart canner, and so I actually put 4 quarts of water in here. My water is boiling. Get my funnel, and I'm going to go ahead and start pouring my water in. You want to put your water into within a 1/2 inch of the top of the jar, and I usually do 1 inch. You don't have to have a funnel, but it sure makes less of a mess because I tend to drip. The other thing I really like is this little pot that has a pour lid on it. If you wanted to use something or find something like this for your canning, this is actually just a butter pot. It's a butter melting pot that I found at a garage sale. Now I'm just going to take a knife and run it around the edge of the jars. This will get rid of the air bubbles that are in there. And you don't really want the air bubbles because air bubbles in your jars will discolor your fruit or vegetables. If you do put salt in your jars, After you put the salt in, then you're going to want to take a washcloth and just wipe the edges of all of the rims. Since I don't put anything in here, I don't have to worry about checking my rims. And I'm going to go ahead and put my lids on here. I've got this cool little magnetic lid lifter, so I don't have to stick my fingers in the hot water, but for years I didn't have one of these. Oops. So I just used a little knife to separate the lids. And I'll go ahead and put my screw bands on. See if I don't drop them on the floor. You want to put them on firmly tight, so you don't really have to crank down on them. Just kind of spin them until they're nice and firmly on there. And I'm going to start putting the jars into my pressure canner. Check the lids again. I can fit 8 pints into the bottom of my pressure canner. And if you're working with pints, I highly recommend you buy an extra rack, because then you can put one more level of pint jars in here. All right, I've locked my lid down, turned my stove on, and I'm gonna wait till this heats up. For pints, I want to get my pressure up to 10 pounds. As soon as it hits that 10-pound mark right up here at the top, then I'm going to turn my timer on for 20 minutes. If I was doing quarts, I would also do 10 pounds pressure, but for 25 minutes. So it's important to point out that I'm at sea level. If you are at a higher altitude, you're going to want to adjust your processing pounds according to your altitude. So here's a chart for you to take a quick peek at. You can pause this if you need to really look at it. All right, so my vent pipe back here is up, and this is called an overpressure plug, and that has come up. So I should be starting to build pressure soon. I glanced over and I am just over 10 pounds, so I'm going to adjust my heat. Let that drop down to 10 pounds, and I'm going to put my timer on for 20 minutes. I also wanted to note that there is some spitting, and that's completely natural and normal. So my timer's going off, so I'm going to go ahead and just shut the heat off and let this cool down. If I had an electric stove, I'd probably take it off the stovetop and let it cool down off of the stovetop. My pressure is almost to 0, and my vent pipe is still up. So I'm going to wait till the vent pipe drops before I take the lid off, and then there's absolutely 0 chance that a lid's going to come flying off of here. All right. Did you take the lid off? You want to take it off away from you, in case you have any drips. I don't want to get burned. Ta-da! We got beans. Once my beans are cold and I have checked them for a seal, I'm going to go ahead and take the screw bands off, and I'm going to wash the jar in soapy water. I'm doing that so that bacteria doesn't collect on the outside of the jar. You don't want to grab this out of your canning cupboard and find mold on it or whatever. So I'm going to go ahead and wash that. I'm also going to wash my screw bands. I'm going to leave these off when I store my jars, because you can sometimes lose a seal if you store them with the screw bands on. Once my jars have dried off, I go ahead and date them, and they're ready to be stored. And one last note, I don't normally store my jars more than 2 on top of each other, because again, you can have a failed seal. Hey, thanks for watching my video on how to can beans. I hope you find it useful. If you like my video, hit like and hit that subscribe button below, and we'll see you in the next one. Thanks for watching.